Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is citizen concerns. I do not see any citizens ready with concerns, so we're going to move on to an update on the South Acton Vision and Action Plan.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kristen Guichard. I'm the planning director for the town of Acton. A lot of familiar faces, so it's nice to see you all. And I'm not sure, Vladimir, if we've met before, but it's nice to meet you. So tonight, I'm very excited to give an update on the South Acton Vision and Action Plan. And a big component of that is also the compliance with the state's new MBTA Communities Act. So it's kind of what we're calling it short term. Sometimes we call it Section 3A. For short, but that you'll hear that every now and then around town if we're chatting about it. But we're trying to call it the MBTA Communities Act. Most people recognize it that way. But the South Acton Vision and Action Plan is really about updating the 1995 South Acton Plan, which is very old, and at the same time looking at how Acton can comply with the state's new regulations for the MBTA communities. And we're looking at this together because the MBTA station in Acton is in South Acton, and some of the requirements for this new law have to deal with creating zoning to allow for multifamily within a half-mile radius of the train station. So it seemed to make the most sense to look at this as an iterative process. I'm not sure how many of you have been able to take part in some of the engagement activities that have been going on since last summer. But I'll kind of go through what we've done so far. And if some of it's repetitive, I apologize, but I'll try to go through kind of a broad brush of the overall project, but then concentrate more closely on the MBTA Communities Act, because I think that was what the Finance Committee was most interested in at this point. So what is a vision and action plan? So when we're working on planning initiatives with the community, we're looking at how we can gather feedback from the residents and understand what their vision is for a particular area. What are their goals? What do they hope to see? And that involves a lot of community engagement activities, a lot of robust outreach in different variety of methods. And then we try to compile all of that information and really analyze it to create a comprehensive framework to achieve those goals and kind of setting what the vision is. And then we have to deal with how are we going to get there? What are we going to take as action items to get there? And in terms of land use, we're looking at zoning, because zoning is really the tool that allows a community to dictate the framework of how they want land to be used if they don't own it. So we also need to look again at how the town can comply with the MBTA Communities Act and what the town's goal and vision is for achieving that, because it's not black and white, and there are different things that the town can do and decide. And so I want to pause really quickly. I know most of you know what zoning is, but just to set a kind of quick overview of it, zoning is really the town's local laws. It regulates land in terms of the types of uses that the town allows. So anything from single family to multifamily, commercial uses, industrial uses like manufacturing or restaurants, things like that. And it also includes dimensional regulations, so height restrictions, setback requirements from property lines, how much floor area you can build on the land, how much open space you need to have on the land. So I'm going to dive into the MBTA Communities Act, so that's Section 40A, for MGL, Section 40A, and then Section 3A. And this is basically what the state law says on the screen. It requires cities and towns served by the MBTA to zone a district of reasonable size to allow multifamily housing near MBTA stations. The state further provided regulations on how that needs to be achieved, and Acton currently does not comply with those regulations. So what do the regulations say? The regulations say that Acton has to have a minimum of 50 acres throughout the town zoned to allow for multifamily by right. By right means it's not a discretionary process. You would be entitled to approval if you meet all of the regulations. So it's a type of use that's allowed by right, such as like single family housing. That's allowed by right. There's no special permit required. And the state says that you need to allow it at an average of 15 units per acre. So they say an average of 15 units per acre, and I'll get into why they say that in a little bit. And they also say that you need to create zoning that could potentially yield 1,383 units. Now, this is not a building mandate. It doesn't mean that the town has to construct this number of units. It just means that the state wants communities to create zoning that could potentially achieve that number of units. They didn't want communities to say, we allow multifamily by right, go ahead, but we're gonna only allow you to have 15 feet of like maximum height, and you need a 100-foot setback, where you could really not physically build multifamily. So they put these standards in place to set a level that they want to see achieved. And just for context, what does reasonable size mean? The total of 50 acres is the amount the town has to zone to allow for multifamily. And then in more detail, they state that 10 of those 50 acres have to be allowed within the half mile of the MBTA station. And the remaining 40 acres can be anywhere you want. Again, for context, this green square, the overall larger square, is the total area within the half-mile radius of the South Acton train station. So if you had the South Acton train station, you draw a big half-mile radius around it, there's 502 acres within that area. But then within that area, there's only 246 acres that are actually developable because we have a lot of wetlands, we have a lot of flood zone, and we have a big river that runs right through. So there's not a whole lot of land area that's actually developable in context with the total half-mile radius. But then if you look further at the regulations, they say that throughout town, you only need to zone to allow for 50 acres. So that's much smaller than the amount that's actually developable within the South Acton Village District. And then 10 of those acres, again, have to be constructed within the half-mile radius. So just to give you kind of a comparison of how much land area and what they're talking about. So Acton does have local control. So this gets into that public engagement and why it's really important to get community feedback that we've been doing over the past year and a half. Because the town can decide where they want to allow for multifamily at this level. They can also decide how they want to achieve that average unit per acre. So the town does not have to zone the entire area at 15 units per acre. They could decide to zone some locations at a lower density and then offset that by allowing for a higher density in other locations. And the town can also choose to have certain design standards. So if there's certain architectural standards that the town wants to impose, again, that is clear and predictable, they can do that. And the town can impose an inclusionary zoning aspect to this overlay or type of zoning district. Up to 10% of the overall units can be deed restricted affordable in perpetuity to 80% of the area median income, meaning that there are eligibility requirements for moving into those units or buying those units or renting those units. And this was one of the things that the state had not originally addressed clearly, but then they kind of put out more guidance on it as we entered through the process. So what happens if Acton doesn't comply? This is a question that we've gotten throughout the process. The Attorney General made it very clear in a memo that was released about a half a year ago that the communities that are not in compliance and fail to comply may result in civil enforcement action and liability under federal and state fair housing laws. So that's something that's been clarified throughout the state. And the one piece that we did know about all along was that communities would not be eligible for certain funding. A lot of these funding sources that are listed, MassWorks, local capital project funds, or housing choice initiatives, are all ones that Acton relies on pretty heavily. I hope you can see this, because now that I'm looking at it, the letters look a little small. But this is just an overview of the timeline and the public engagement that we've done so far. I'm not sure if, hopefully you were all able to take the townwide survey. We sent a mailing out to all residential addresses, so we made sure to get to everybody that had an address, whether you're a renter or if you owned your home. And then we also had individual stakeholder meetings with like the Acton Water District, the DPW department, And then we followed that up with an in-person workshop, and we did a series of workshops during the day and also at night to kind of augment the townwide survey to make sure that people that weren't comfortable with online surveys had an opportunity to still share their opinions. And so we did that in January. And then in the spring, we gathered a lot of that information and synthesized that and put that out for a virtual public workshop. And in that workshop, we were able to start talking about, again, refining that vision and taking the information that we received from the public outreach and putting out a proposal to the community about how the town could achieve compliance, and also some of the feedback that we were hearing about design criteria. So we were able to do a visual preference survey, which is kind of fun. You get to pick like, what do you like, this or that, in terms of architectural styles, and also learning from the community what they'd like to see for that South Acton core village zoning. What we heard a lot is that people really want more commercial. They want restaurants, they want retail in that South Acton village core. And then over the summer, we took that same workshop and kind of tried to mimic what we did before with the open house and using those same materials, but bringing them out to the public. So we went to playgrounds, to the MBTA station, we went to the Council on Aging, we went to the Acton Housing Authority, and tried to hit up places that people were, that maybe they don't normally participate in public processes, and tried to go to people. And now we are here next Tuesday. We hope you'll be able to join us because we're having a workshop at the library again from 6 to 8. And it will be a very similar style where you can walk in, view some poster boards, and give your feedback, because we'll be talking about the zoning recommendations for 3A compliance. So we heard a lot from community members on the proposed locations and overall concept, which I'll share with you next. And this is going to be kind of refining that further. And then we're going to be meeting with business owners in the South Acton Village core to talk about some zoning changes for the Village District. And then we'll be holding another workshop to focus on the Village District. So next week is really a focus on 3A compliance, and then the following workshop will be focused on the Village core. They're very much interrelated, but we wanted to separate them out because there's so much. It's really a lot to talk about. And then in the spring of 2024, so our upcoming town meeting, we're planning on bringing zoning proposals in front of the community for consideration, both for the South Acton Village zoning and also for MBTA compliance. And the deadline for Acton to comply is December 31st, 2024. So getting into the vision statement, this is what the community arrived at through the public workshops. In the future, South Acton Village is a thriving, transit-oriented neighborhood that is welcoming to all people of all ages and incomes. The Village Center has retained its historic small charm while expanding its diversity of housing and business offerings. South Acton draws in visitors to shop, dine, admire the many historic features, and visit recreational facilities. And it is safe and easy to travel within the South Acton area and from South Acton to other parts of town, no matter the mode of transportation. So I'm going to now show you what the draft proposals are for the MBTA communities compliance. You may have seen these on poster boards. They've been out in town hall for, I think, the entire summer, so this might not be new to all of you. But the proposed draft approach, again, took into consideration all the public feedback, as well as looking at existing conditions, so understanding what the geographical area is like as well. So we heard a lot of feedback from the community that there was a little bit of concern about retaining the historic character of South Acton. So all of the locations are proposed outside of the historic district, so there was no concern of conflict. All locations are also outside of Zone 1 and Zone 2 of the Groundwater Protection District. Those are Acton's most highly regulated districts. So there are usually, in terms of multifamily, if you're going to have a multifamily development, you would need to have to consider your wastewater treatment, and you'd need tertiary treatment, so there'd have to be many more considerations if you're going to do higher density multifamily in a Zone 1, for example. And then the locations are in keeping with the strategies of the Climate Action Plan to locate more multifamily housing choices within the half mile of public transit and near existing village districts. It's also in keeping with the housing production plan. And the locations are outside of the South Acton Village zoning district. So as I mentioned before, we heard a lot of feedback from community members that were expressing their desire to have more commercial in the village core. And so we wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be anything proposed that may be in conflict with that. So at the time, mixed use, allowing commercial with residential, was not something that the state was going to allow. About a month ago, they updated the regulations, but they're now allowing for mixed use if it helps communities comply, but there are a lot of parameters around that, and it would make it difficult for, I think, Acton to achieve the desires for mixed use and more commercial in that zone. So the proposed draft is not proposing any of the MBTA communities within the South Acton Village core. So the proposed draft would create 2 new overlay districts. Overlay districts are districts that are put on top of underlying districts. So where there is zoning today, all of that would still be allowed. And then this would propose 2 new districts that would be options on top of those existing districts. Overlay District 1, which is shown in that kind of orangey brown color, coming up along Central Street and Main Street to Prospect on either side, would allow for smaller scale multifamily homes at a scale of less than 15 units per acre. And that would be within that half-mile radius of the train station, meeting that requirement. And the thought process there was about thinking about infill development within the context of the existing neighborhood, and also considering there's not a lot of parcels within the half-mile radius that have not already been purchased by the town for open space or covered with wetlands or within the flood zone. And so this particular location seemed the most viable and in keeping with what the community has been expressing for their vision about connections as well. And the depth of a lot of these lots are more shallow. They don't go very far back and they're much smaller. So if the community were to look at a higher density, 15 units or more per acre, you may have to start talking about a higher height. And when you're close to the street and you have a building that's very tall, you notice it a lot more. But when it can be a little bit shorter, it's not as noticeable. So that was the thought process there. And then in order to offset the lower density of lower than 15 units per acre, the proposal would look at rezoning 3 locations that are larger lots to allow for more than 15 units per acre, where development could be further back from the street. And these locations, there is one further up on Central Street. That's where Dover Heights apartment is located right now. There's a significant amount of undeveloped land in the back that is developable. The Powder Mill Apartments project that is permitted and moving forward is the one that you can see on the bottom right. So rezoning that would acknowledge its future use that has already been permitted, but also add on the parcel that's next door where the medical marijuana facility is located. So it would add additional land area that's not currently cited for multifamily. And then the other location that's proposed is the Parker Street Apartments, and then the land adjacent to that that runs along the MBTA station that's currently owned by W.R. Grace. They have been in front of the Acton Community Housing Corporation with an interest to explore housing in that option, or in that location, but it's not moving forward at this point, but we know that there's interest, so there is possibility in the future. So for the draft approach, smaller scale multifamily, what does that scale look like? 2 examples that we have in Acton already. The one on the left is the condo units that are right across the street from the True West Brewery. So those were built quite a long time ago. They're historic. And then the newer condos that are located across from the Discovery Museum, which was a 40B project. So those 2 projects are less than 15 units per acre, around a 10 unit per acre style. So when you're thinking about what could this look like, where is it in town already? Those are some contextual examples. And then for larger scale multifamily, what could that look like? Avalon Phase 2 is an example. A lot of people chose that one in the visual preference survey, that they seem to really like that. If you haven't been up there, it's worth taking a look. Phase 2 is very different than Phase 1. There's single access, so each unit has their own entry, but some are like upstairs, but some are ground floor. It's a very different product, I think, than the rest of kind of the more standard Avalon developments. And then the powder mill development that's on the right of the screen there is the project that was permitted. The image there is actually higher than what the amended permit that was just recently approved would allow. But that's an example of what the project was going to look like. It now has slight changes, just so you know. So we're hoping that you'll join us next week on Tuesday. I hope to see your faces there, and I'm here to answer any questions. Yes.
How many units are at at Avalon?
I don't know off the top of my head.
In the new phase, I should say.
I'll have to look it up for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
the other one was, I thought Powder Mill was pretty much dead.
Powder Mill is 230 units. It's not dead. It was actually just brought back to the Zoning Board of Appeals to extend their permit. The board, and they also had an amendment that was approved. So it was originally, I think, 7 stories high. It was brought down to 5 stories, and they reconfigured the layout slightly. So the ZBA just approved that a few months ago, and they had a couple of engineering plan changes that they had to tweak. We actually just received their updated plans, and it's with our third-party review engineer right now. So it is moving forward.
Do they have any idea of when they're going to break ground, or what their timeline is, I should say?
I hope this winter. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for coming in. This has definitely been a topic that we've been interested to hear more about, so I appreciate a full presentation. I do have a couple of questions, though. The first of which is, I believe you said that we are required by law to have 1,385 or 1,388 units over it available as sum total, correct?
So the state law says that you have to zone to allow for a unit yield. So they have a calculator. It's like an Excel spreadsheet. And what they're requiring communities to do is to make sure that they put in certain data. For example, how many acres, and you plug that in, what the setbacks are, and you plug that in, what the height restrictions are, and you plug that in. And it spits out a number. And that's basically the target number that we have to hit. So it doesn't mean that you have to construct that many. It just means they want to make sure that whatever zoning regulations, dimensional regulations you put in could potentially achieve that number based on their calculator.
Right.
So it's theoretical, but
that number is not close to the rest of the requirements. If the rest of the requirements were 50 acres with at least 15 units, that's only 750 units. To meet their requirement, the actual average number of units per acre is 27.6. So that's significantly higher than the 15. So it's a little misleading. Even if it's just a theoretical number, that theoretical number is allowed.
yeah, you have to
So
meet,
it's not a 15 unit per average acre in the town of Acton. It's 28.
you have to meet both regulations. So what we have right now does comply. It's actually, we're well in compliance at this point. So based on their calculator, it complies with what we're showing. But I think, but you're right, if you're looking at it that way, at a quick glance, it's like, wait, no, this can't be. But you have to comply with every aspect of the law. So in this particular proposal that's being laid out for the community, and based on the calculator and we're working with MAPC as our consultant, we are meeting the targets that the town has set forth.
Right. So I would say you don't have to worry about meeting the average. If you meet the 1,380, you're going to meet the average by default, unless your plan is to have many more than 50 acres be part of the overlay. Which way are we thinking of doing it?
So you have to have an average of 15 units per acre. But if we were to zone, let's say, 40 acres as 5 units per acre, we wouldn't get there, right? So, I mean, in the proposal that we're putting forward right now, we're looking at a much lower density within the half-mile radius because we want to make sure that we can offset it.
But are we looking to limit ourselves to the 50 acres required, or are we looking to be at 16 units per acre times 300 acres?
It really depends on how the community wants to look at it. So the community can decide to say, in our zoning, we're gonna say you're capped at 10 units per acre, or you're capped at 15 units per acre. Or the community could say, we're gonna set height regulations, setback regulations, but we're not going to tell you what your unit maximum is, but we wanna regulate the land use in a different way, but we're gonna allow for multifamily, you figure it out. And you can decide if you want larger units and you get less because you're using more land area for bigger units, or if you want smaller units and more of them. So it's really a question for the community, and if you're interested in like setting a cap, that's something that Acton can absolutely do. Right now with the proposal, you know, it's at a point where we're looking at tweaking to figure out what, you know, what the community wants. And there are some individuals that are very concerned about capping and others that have expressed not capping, but rather regulating more dimensionally.
So how many acres in this current plan, how many acres are being used?
I will get that. I can get all the data to you in terms of like the calculator data if you're interested.
Definitely want to see that.
Sure,
Definitely want to see that.
absolutely.
Is this accretive to our requirements for 40B?
So 40B is not, this is not 40B. Section 40B is a separate law. There is some connection only because of the inclusionary zoning aspect.
That's
So,
where I was trying to focus
yeah.
on. If we put in the inclusionary zoning, does that help us get and stay in safe harbor for 40B?
So 10%, it depends because it's a moving number, it's a moving target, right? As you're building new market rate units, that's changing the denominator. So
But we're only allowed to be at 10%.
10% is the maximum amount,
So
yeah.
no matter what, it actually hurts. By complying with this law, it hurts our compliance level. It's straight math. It hurts our compliance level with 40B.
Well,
if we take
I think
the
it would be a
10%
wash, this law would be a wash, but the rest of the zoning is the unknown, right? Because in this particular case, if you're allowing an overlay district, and what we've been hearing from the community is they want the inclusionary zoning, the requirement is, 40B requirement is that communities have 10% deed restricted affordable. So if 10% is the law throughout town, it would end up being a wash with this district. But the rest of the zoning throughout town, if it doesn't have inclusionary, there's no way to control the market rate units being developed without deed restrictions in that area. Does that make sense? Okay.
Just bringing it to everyone's attention that this by straight math is a problem. It's two competing state mandates, which are going to, one is going to make compliance of the other one that much harder. This law has already been changed at least twice. I believe the first iteration of the law was that half of the acreage had to be within a half a mile of the train station. And it sounds like they've made at least a second change, which is the potential use of mixed use. What are we doing to lobby to continue to break down this law or make it fit more easily with our small town charm? That was one of the vision statements for it. So I understand we have to comply with it. I'm not suggesting we flout the law, but I am saying we need to put our energies around lobbying to make this fit better to the character of this town. So what lobbying activities is the town staff doing, and what lobbying activities, I'll ask the select board member to weigh in on as well. What are we doing to get out from the burden of this law?
We've not been directed to lobby at this time. So the law hasn't changed. Just want to make sure it's clear that the law hasn't changed. It's that, like, the language of 40A, Section A, has not changed. What's changed are the regulations that the state is putting forward. So it's a little bit nuanced, but it's important to note. But no, the town staff has not been directed to lobby for anything.
The only people that could direct you to lobby for it would be the select board?
We take direction from the town manager and town manager through select board, but.
Okay, so I will continue to rest my case with the select board. Have you done any analysis for what the cost to the town would be if 3,000 new residents came in over a relatively short period of time, which would be not an unreasonable thing to expect with 1,380 new units in town. And while I understand that it is, only proposed, and it's not going to happen overnight, it's available as soon as we get compliant as soon as we change our zoning laws. Correct?
No, I think you changed the overlay, but that doesn't mean that overnight or over years even, those are gonna pop up. So they are going to maybe add on, but this suggests we're gonna get 3,000 new people 1 year,
Oh,
2
I
years,
don't
3
think it'll
years,
be-
4 years,
I don't think
5
it'll be-
years.
I don't think it'll be overnight, but I think, what, do we have the water resources? Do we have the sewer resources? What kind of speed are we comfortable with? Do you think that we're able to absorb this with? Because once the zoning is changed and it's allowed by right, we can't say, oh, no, you got to put a brake on that while we figure out a new sewer or a new wastewater treatment facility.
That's a great question. So in terms of sewer capacity or wastewater treatment capacity, that's really up to the private market and the private developer. So if there is not sewer capacity, then they can't build. It's just like it is today. If something doesn't park, they can't build on the land. But the town is saying that rather than just allowing for single-family homes in this location, we're also going to allow for multifamily in compliance with the state law. But if it can't be developed for a reason like wastewater treatment, then it can't be developed at this point in time. But the parameters that the state wants to make sure that we are looking at is they don't want the town to be zoning undevelopable land area that is within the wetlands or land area that is conservation land, because it's just not possible. And so those areas are not proposed and not counted towards the calculator because you can't develop on them. But there's no way that they can know or regulate wastewater capacity unless we parked throughout the entire district, which is just not possible. So that number is, again, a theoretical number, and the Excel calculator can't take into account whether or not land can park, whether or not there's ledge that's, not really going to be viable for some type of development that they're looking at. So there are other things that are restrictive on the land that are going to be barriers in and of themselves, like wastewater, until there is capacity or until down the line, I don't know, 25 years from now, the town figures something else out, 50 years from now, because zoning is about the future. But you're right, I mean, development could happen on a site after it's enacted, but it's not, it's really in the developer's hand to provide wastewater management, and that's something that the state's not looking at either from their calculator. They're kind of putting the blinders up saying, all right, we got to set this somehow. How are we going to do it? We know that there are other things that are going to regulate the development of land and the capacity on the land, but this is the only way that we can set some type of number up, so.
Okay, that's actually encouraging. Thank you. Thank you for presenting.
Absolutely.
Thank you. There was some question really early on if our shuttle from the commuter rail could possibly provide an extension to our larger possible compliance area. Did we get that settled?
So I think we did look into that, but since we did, it was clear that there is 50 acres the town has to comply with to zone, and 40 acres can be outside of the half-mile radius. So it wasn't something that people seemed concerned about as we worked through the workshops. But what they were looking at that point was when they made it clear that it was 10 acres, they wanted to see it within that half-mile radius.
Okay, all right. About how many people were you getting at some of the meetings that you held?
It really ranged. So we had a really good turnout for the survey. I'd have to take a look to see, but I want to say it was like 800 or something like that. We had a variety of individuals, some repeats, coming multiple times because they really enjoyed it. We did have lovely background music for the the walkthrough. I want to say that was around 60 individuals. And then when we went around to all of the different places, it was a whole range. So at the train station, we had some people that came up to us and asked a couple questions. Some people wanted to hear the whole proposal, which was up here. Basically, those were those slides. And then at the Council on Aging, I want to say we had about 15 people. And for the virtual workshop, I'd have to take a look. I don't remember. But it seemed that more people tend to attend, like, to come to the virtual webinars, but it seemed like it was also very important to still do something in person. So we've been trying to do both, because people, I think, just share information and communicate in different ways depending on their circumstances and just how their being is too, you know? And I think we're hoping to, again, you know, kind of do that as we move forward with all of our planning initiatives as time allows. And one thing you know, in terms of the open house, you know, if you're able to kind of extend the word out to your networks, we really would appreciate that, so.
Specific to just the South Acton Vision Plan, I assume that you are taking into account the parking shortage that is often brought up in that area?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So we actually conducted an in-house parking study. It will be posted shortly and as part of the existing conditions analysis. So we did a few days of certain hours throughout the day. We counted parking in all of the public lots as well as the private lots. And we also wanted to take a closer look at the MBTA station because we had that really robust study that was conducted before COVID, and things have changed drastically. I think as planners, it's a really interesting time because we really don't know how things are going to change into the future with work from home policies and how people are just organizing their daily lives differently with transit. But it also, I think, lends for a discussion about how we can utilize parking for multiple uses at different times during the day. But the study showed that there is a significant amount of vacant parking spaces, both public and private. One of the parking lots was vacant every single time that we went. One thing that struck me, and I started telling people I know that take the train, is the Railroad Street parking that's actually owned by the MBTA station. It's the only free spot. It's like a little spot right behind the blue Realty building. There were empty spaces, which was, I think, just very interesting. So we do have a full parking analysis and study that we've conducted that will be posted shortly.
Okay, great, thank you.
You mentioned an empty lot in South Acton. I remember there was a lot that was much discussed a while back because there was talk about selling it. And there was a sign specifically saying that you weren't allowed to park there. But one of the arguments was, well, this lot's empty all the time. And then someone had pointed out that, yeah, it's empty because we're told we can't use it, not because it was in fact empty. So I just want to make sure it wasn't that lot.
So the School Street lot was the lot that was always empty. One of the things that we noted in the parking study is that some of the signage was a bit confusing. And so we kind of made a note of how the different parking regulations, depending on the lot, may be different. So we didn't, I want to make sure that I make it clear too, we didn't count spaces at night or on the weekends. So it was during the day into the evening, you know, past like 7 o'clock, but not at night or on the weekends. So we didn't extend ourselves.
Yeah, my understanding is
far.
that lot is much used on the weekend.
Yeah.
And evenings with the exchange hall and everything there. I have nothing else to add. Do we have any more questions or comments? Thank you. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
one tiny thing.
Yep.
You say fall 2024 on your timeline slide. You mean fall 2023? Because you talk about the next bullet item is about the
Oh, yes.
presentation on October 3rd.
Yeah, let me go back to make sure that I make that clear. Let's see. Yes, so spring 2024.
The spring is correct, just 2024.
No, that's
but
correct.
Fall 2023.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, we're still in 2023. That should be, so yes. So the workshop is next week,
yes.
not in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much, appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
All right, the next item on the agenda is point of view. Did you get any good feedback from anyone, Christine?
I got some I got some feedback from one person. I made some changes myself based on our previous conversations, and if you'll give me a minute, I will connect
Thank you.
to the screen.
I'm going to let you take over the conversation.
Okay, so for those of you who did your homework, you all had copies of this, because I shared it with you. But I also went off a lot of our previous conversations and made some updates. Not to this slide, because I honestly think this is one of the last slides we'll update, once we figure everything else out. Okay. Unchanged, this is in general spending, this is our revenue explanation slide. Also unchanged, this is the projections of our revenue versus expenses per the current ALG model. This is our commentary on, thanks, Adam.
I'm sorry, can you back up?
Sure.
Just,
Sorry,
no, the ALG model, do you know if that includes the new base number for the school budget? Because that's what they increased when they found the double counting.
so probably not, because this is August 18th, so anything that happened after August 18th,
Okay, I'll get you a copy of that so we can fix.
so we can update it?
Yeah.
That'd be great. You broke the whole thing.
Oh, it's on now.
Yeah. For those of you at home, we're waiting for some screens to reboot. Our vast at-home audience.
We have 50 people who watch every meeting, just so you know.
Probably several of them. All right. Okay, yeah, so I need to update that number. All right, again, compensation is our biggest budgetary item. This is unchanged for the last two presentations of this because these numbers are up to date. Okay, so this slide changed slightly. Using my at-home average Joe taxpayer / my husband, who thought that the original presentation was a little confusing about what we were saying with the percentages available for increase. So I just showed it a little different. So if that works for everybody, he found it much more readable, but we don't have to take his word for it.
I like that. I'm a little confused just on looking up, it's been there the whole time, but we say below fixed expenses, and then there are a bunch of percentages. Is it worth changing that to fixed expense increases? I glanced up and I said, what do the percentages mean? And that's not that it's that percent of the overall bar. That's the percent at which it increases.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. That's the year-over-year increase, so that's worth noting.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Yes, I can definitely do that. All right. Good? Awesome. There's been discussion of our reserve policy again. I wondered if it made sense to put our policy back in the point of view. Good thing to probably do every couple of years, just to confirm this is what it is. Presented in as few words as possible.
Do the speaker's notes relative to the free cash, I don't remember if it's the same for the E&D, talk about the fact that this is based on DOR and
Yes.
somewhere else? Okay.
Yep, definitely. Okay. And then that followed by our recommendation, which, the free cash has been submitted for final approval, but that final approval comes in October for the schools and the town, and then we can say, okay, as of this certified date, this amount, we recommend for the coming year to use no more than X amount.
At the ALG meeting, the superintendent said that he believed that the E&D was going to come in around 2.77%. There seems to be a bit of discrepancy. Is your number if everything that was used goes to zero, or I'm just curious where the mismatch between this number and what the superintendent said at ALG is.
I don't have the certified number on there. I have what was used last year.
The total budget being the total AB budget? The 1.58%?
Yeah, because it's down under the AVRSD E&D section.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah. Are you saying that he's saying that that's the amount that they used?
He's saying that they're going to be at 2.77%.
That's what they have left?
No, that's what, yes.
Yeah, this is what they used. This is what they spent in last year's budget.
FY24 budgeted use brings E&D to 1.58% of total. So we're saying if they have zero turnbacks.
Right, because that's,
Okay.
Yep. So their use of 1.375 brings E&D down to, I guess maybe I should include a number.
Would bring
Yeah.
E&D down if no turnbacks.
It doesn't matter.
before
because
turnbacks.
Because if our policy is that we're not pre-counting turnbacks, then regardless of turnbacks, we want that number to be 3.
Agreed. So go back one slide.
Yep.
Can we change that double asterisk to be a little more explicit at the bottom? Rather than saying FinCom does not advise spending below floor with assumptions that future turnbacks will bring reserves back in compliance with the recommended policy. Can we change that to say something, I'm actually suggesting less words.
I like that.
FinCom assumes use of reserves
Sorry.
will not be replenished.
Nope. I don't assume that.
But you just said we're making the assumption that it's not going to be
No.
replenished.
No. That is not, it needs to be replenished. That's part of staying within compliance is actually, and keeping our bond rating, is that we do get that money back.
Right.
Which is the argument that I had with John Peterson, that we've never said we assume no turnbacks. What we don't want them to do is guess what those turnbacks are going to be and budget as if that's a given number, and that it's always going to bring them back up to the 3% floor, which is why we ask them instead to spend down to the 3% floor, turnbacks bring you back up. Spend down to the 3% floor, turnbacks bring you back up. Which is what the town is doing, and we would like the school to end up in that position as well.
The assumption that use of reserves would pierce the floor is an assumption of using all of the reserves, of using all of the money and having no turn back.
I don't understand why that is, why what I'm saying infers that.
Because if you expect some kind of return, then you're okay with it being below 3.
Why? I'm expecting a return that hopefully is below 5%, because that's my ceiling.
But you're not even willing, we're not even, and I'm in agreement with this statement, we don't even want them to budget below the 3%.
And we fought for this several years ago, and the town said, okay, we'll do that.
Okay, but the schools aren't even there yet.
No, they haven't been able to. The economic factors haven't
yeah,
allowed them to get there, and
They
I don't
can't do
even.
that this year.
Yeah, no, I don't expect them to.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's not our recommendation.
But the 1.5% looks in some ways more frightening than it is.
This is either our policy or it's not, and it's something we settled on several years back. If you'd like to read.
I'm just talking about how it's communicated on the next slide.
Their use, their budgeted use of 1.375% of E&D leaves them with an amount left in the coffers of 1.58%. Yes, their turnbacks may bring them back up above 3%.
I
but
think
we
you need to
have-
say that, because they're going to look at them and say that number is ridiculous, that's not what it means.
So we're changing how we
Nope.
want them to
No, we're
approach
going to say
reserves?
before projected turnbacks,
But
desired turnbacks? Yeah, go ahead.
We can't have two different policies, one for the town and one for the school.
We're not
This is-
offering that.
This is not a policy statement here. This is simply saying, I'm just talking about the top line. Budgeted use brings them, yes, to 1.58%, but that, we're putting it in the context of how that number is calculated.
And then we say E&D as of October,
June
whatever,
30th.
is this amount. So use no more than, and it's going to be like,
A negative number.
50 grand to remain above the 3% floor.
It'll be a negative number.
It'll probably be a negative number.
Okay.
And we either believe that that's how we want them to use their E&D or we don't. But my understanding based on previous year's policy was that was what we would like them to do. Have they been able to get there? No, and we've understood that and we've not pushed it, but that's still our recommendation.
Understood.
But what I'm saying, and what I think Jason was saying also, is that in terms of communication, this looks, the situation is dire. I don't disagree with that. But this is a little apples and oranges.
No, it's apples and apples.
It's apples and apples. I see it as apples and apples.
They're going to look at that, okay. If I was on the school committee, I would look at that and say, that's not true. That's sort of cherry picking what you're going to care about. Ignoring the whole, when do you count? I think you have to put it in the context of when do you count turnbacks. You could put it in the next line, E&D as of certification date, certified amount is,
Represents 2.77%.
yes.
That is completion. And we can do the same thing on the town side. That way is 100% apples to apples and drives home the point that your starting point is already below our floor and you're still planning on using money, so you're doubly below our floor. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I missed the first part of what you said.
So the line where it says E&D as of certification date, certification amount, once we have those numbers, which represent as of certification date an E&D
Yep.
position of, 2.7%, to make a distinction between the 158, which is a derived number for the number out, because otherwise people are going to do what I just did. I fell into the trap myself, so if I fall into the trap, I'm going to assume that maybe two other people are going to fall in the same trap. They're going to say, no, I know that our E&D is at 2.7%,
Yep.
rather than this 158 that we're calling out, which is a derived number. Does that make sense now?
Sure, yeah, no, I'm happy to do that for both the town and the school.
Steve?
Can I confuse things?
I'm already confused, so.
The whole discussion is a little wonky. If our target is the school committee and board of selectmen, I'm going to hazard a guess that half of them won't know what we're talking about. For the general public, the idea of budgeted turnbacks is an oxymoron. We either budget accurately or we don't. If we consistently under budget, or over budget our expenses, they're going to think there's something wrong with our budget process. So it's not the idea of budgeted turnbacks is an extremely hard thing to talk to anybody about that's not deeply into the details of this stuff. So I would suggest we just go with, this is what they were at certification date, and one of them is at target and one of them is not, and leave it at that.
I don't think we can leave it at that. I think we have to discuss, because we're always budgeting for the next year. So unfortunately, the certification lags so darn long that it's not helpful, but I do believe that we have to discuss both. We have to declare what the number was at the certification date. We have to declare what their expected use is. And then we can lead the horse to water by saying, the average population may not be super well steeped in turnbacks, but when we explain that it is the approximately 1% that is difficult to budget and, is the slosh if revenues are better than expected, or is the shortfall if expenses are higher than. I think we can do this. I definitely think we can do this.
Well, I'll turn the logic around, and I did this years ago with John Peterson. if you are budgeting to use reserves, but in reality, you know you're not actually going to use them, what are we doing?
We're giving a 1% slush fund.
Okay.
And
So
that's,
put that in the slide.
I'm not against that being in the speaker's notes, because I definitely believe, the way I look at the use of reserves, I must assume that once we commit to a bottom line budget, once we commit the use of the reserves, those dollars, in my opinion, in my mind, are gone. I cannot count on them coming back.
Correct, but in reality, they usually aren't.
Well, right up until the year that they aren't. So,
It does help with situations that have happened now at the school where suddenly they have $700,000 in last-minute expenses relative to students moving into the town that they need the money for, and that can come directly out of what they were hoping to hold back as turnbacks.
yeah, if they had started the year above the 3% floor.
I think the answer to a lot of this can just be cleared up in how we speak to it in the
Can
speaker's notes.
I also, one other option, we can just get rid of that first line of each of those two sets. It's muddying the water. We can just say free cash certification as of blank is this amount, which is X% of the total budget, use no more than X number to remain above the 3% floor. We don't necessarily need that top bulleted item on either line. It's causing confusion.
That would probably make it clearer to the,
Yeah, good point.
for us presenting it and for the people
Yeah.
reading it.
Yep,
So I'd agree with that.
okay, cool. Then we're just working off the certified number. This is the amount that brings you to the 3% floor.
But please do make sure to do the percentage at the end,
Yep, yes, I think the percentage, once certified. Yep,
please.
okay.
And I think we just, again, in the speaker's notes, need to say something short and sweet about what these numbers mean.
Yeah, we've said in the past that we understand that, given the current financial times, it's not possible for the schools to comply with our recommendation, but we hope that in the future.
Well, I'm thinking actually, speaking specifically to Steve's point about there being potentially select board members and school committee members who are not as focused on this financial aspect, to do a quick one-sentence explanation.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so about the capital projects list. So this capital projects list is unfortunately a mix of excluded debt and operating budget projects. That's not clear from the document that it's in, or at least it wasn't clear to me. It's still useful in understanding what higher budget things are coming our way, because we have to pay for them whether within the operating budget or as excluded debt. So with that in mind, this is our current excluded debt service, and these are our projected excluded debt service projects. All of the black or dark gray is our set in stone current projects.
Set in stone, slate gray.
There you go. And then the other four are potential projects with guesstimated.
I really like the way this lays it out.
Okay.
Thank you. This looks great.
All right, cool. Moving on. Capital project recommendations. I assume we do not recommend a sidewalk debt exclusion project at this time, given what we were just looking at. And DPW and Conant projects should be approached with extreme fiscal accountability, needs-based designs, resident support, building longevity. Jason, you want to let the cat out of the bag to the rest of the committee?
Yes. We had the first capital improvement, the school capital improvement plan meeting of the cycle, and we were informed that Conant, since for years now, we've been submitting letters of interest to the MSBA regarding Conant. Even when we were building the new building, the first year building the new building, we still submitted letters of interest. The MSBA came back this year and said that they were willing to at least talk with us about it. So they did a walkthrough with the superintendent and the town manager. We are supposed to hear back in November we can hear back one of three things. We can hear back, not at this time, thank you very much. We can hear back, they're willing to partner with us for a renovation, or we could hear back they're willing to partner with us for a whole new building. Even if it's a whole new building, we're at least 5 to 7 years off from when we would need to borrow. And I think many of us were surprised that we were back in the hopper as quickly as we were with the MSBA. So we'll know more in November. But yeah, the MSBA has done its first site walkthrough on Conant.
So unfortunately, we have less breathing room on the Conant project than we probably originally thought we had.
Do you have more of my suggestions on preceding slides?
Not yet,
Okay,
no. I looked through them, but I didn't get a chance to actually incorporate them.
okay.
But you go talk to them.
Well, the one that popped in my mind, because I don't have my email in front of me because my laptop is toast. But the one that I wanted to suggest that we socialize with the committee right now, two. One is we do not want to bring a debt exclusion and operating override in the same year, ever. And we also want to go back to what we were told by residents of town who have been here longer than I, that it used to be that any kind of debt exclusion or capital override was socialized at least at the annual town meeting in the year prior to when it might be brought. So that might be a recommendation that we bring back and make sure we socialize with town staff, school staff, and the select board and the school committee.
Given what Jason said about Conant, do we want to go back to the bar chart slide and move Conant out?
Yeah, I can move it out a couple more years
Thank you.
and increase the interest rate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there any sense for those?
Well, what number did you use for Conant?
Didn't you say?
40 million, probably 50 million, 60, I don't know, it's bigger than the DPW.
I was assuming close to 100, like, it would be like
It's-
Douglas.
No, well, it was,
It's going to be closer to 80.
if we do a full rebuild.
If we do a full
But my
rebuild.
understanding is there's a lot of thought that Conant has very good bones, and we may be able to get by with a rehab.
There's also the very real possibility that we do not have to have this, we have this on the horizon, but with a great big question mark, because until November, it's a big old question mark. We might review this in November when we hear back from the MSBA that, no, we're not in the hopper, in which case we can take the bar away. If it comes back that we're in the hopper for a all full rebuild, then I think we should look at 80%, 80 million at 6.5%, 7%.
That's exciting. All right, either way, I will double check the numbers I have and push it off.
But again, I love the way this slide looks. 31.
So, yeah, you have to push Conan out 31 and beyond. You know, because, so I guess those two,
Do you have the, in the speaker's notes, do you have the assumptions for the DPW building?
Not yet. I haven't
you-
written any new speaker's notes. The speaker's notes I have are all ones we've used previously.
I would
But that's my next step, once we kind of get this.
Any of the
oiled.
new colored bars, I'd want the assumptions listed. Because otherwise, if anyone comes back to us and says, this is what you said.
Right.
I want to make sure that we had documented our assumptions.
Right, yep. Okay. Okay. So again, needs-based designs, resident support, building longevity, adding to that potentially town meeting review, not overlapping with operating override. And no recommendation on a sidewalk debt exclusion project at this time. Throwing in information about residents now, demographics, not updated, but it's last year, so it's probably not far off, will be updated. Not the highest of my priorities right now. Okay. Resident tax assessment. We've done a grid in previous years that is still in the appendix, but it was asked if we could sort of chart the year-over-year increase. And I wondered if this was more approachable.
I like this better. I like this better. I think just in terms of scale, the bars can be a little bit smaller, so they're not. Although maybe that's your point, to have them going up off the top of the page.
Yep. I could, in theory, make them shorter. And I was able to bring us back to the average single-family tax assessment. That information is newly back online for all of these years. Unfortunately, not available for a lot of the communities I would want to compare us to like we used to. Concord's got gaps for several years. Sudbury had gaps for several years. But I was able to, if we wanted to, get comparable data for like Lexington and Stowe and Littleton and some of the other communities that we used to kind of say, well, where are we when you compare?
So this is assessed value, not bill paid.
Yes.
Okay.
This is according to the state website, the DOR website,
Does
the tax
tax
assessment.
bill look significantly different? Because you can get that data for comparable communities usually.
So does this not include?
So, sorry, I think this is bill. I should probably be using the word bill. It is
Okay.
the average family tax
Okay.
bill.
But from the DOR, all right. I'm surprised the other ones don't have this.
I think I emailed them a couple of years ago about this, and it's on the community to send it in. So Concord has, unfortunately, like 2021 and 2022 are just missing, so I can't then get an average. And a couple of the others that I would like to have that information for also. So the grid, here, I'll just go quickly to what this used to be represented by was, I went too far. Is it not here? No, it's not that one. I'll put it back in there, sorry. I really thought I moved it to the appendix, but apparently I deleted it. I have it, I just didn't put it in the appendix.
It was a table with the
It was a
house
table.
value
Yeah.
and the tax bill, right?
Yeah, it was that one.
So would it also be informative to have a two-tone bar showing house value and tax bills so that you can see what the proportion is changing as the value of the home?
I mean, does your home, do you really care about your home value, or do you care about the money coming out of your pocket to pay your bills?
It's a good point.
You only recoup the value of your house on the day you sell it.
Yeah,
And presumably you have to buy something else that has gone up as much,
Right.
percentage-wise.
so, yeah, so that's the average, and I will change that to tax bill to make it clear that that's the tax bill.
I like it.
Good, excellent, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, again, we haven't addressed this one, which is going to switch a second, which is one of the reasons we were kind of looking at homework to decide what should belong on this slide.
And you didn't like what I said?
No, definitely, let me just, do you remember what you said? Which slide is this, 15? You said,
It was the old 14.
we agreed wage growth is not keeping up with inflation. Wage growth is not keeping up with the increase in municipal taxation. Reevaluation of housing values has caused large increases in insurance costs. Water district has large capital needs, which will be borne by residents. Residents are being asked to pay more for the same level of service.
That sounds like what I wrote.
I would say all but that last one.
Okay. All right, I will include those in our next iteration, and we are much further along.
What,
Sorry, go ahead.
so is this 2022?
I'm going back. Sorry, it's just taking a second. So
Is that 2022 or are we talking 20?
This was what we presented last year.
Yeah,
And the problem is, if I go back to the sites where I got these, it's like, yeah, it's 2% more, but finding the cumulative number from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, or whatever number we want to use as our baseline, is very hard for all of these. And at some point, it's just going to be what things cost for the next forever.
The damage is done. The damage was done when there was the spike in inflation. So that's why I think we can dump these metrics and move on to others.
Right, and I would argue, and I think successfully, that the town and schools took us seriously. They took this picture seriously, and they did as a pretty small increase last year, all things considered. But now we have to deal with, the drivers of today from where we are. So we just need to know what the story is for this slide. And I think Jason gave some options. I will include them for next time. Feel free to look it over, and if anybody else has any other suggestions. Okay. This slide, the inset of the table, the inset of the numbers behind this seemed to maybe cause some confusion. So that is in the appendix. And I'll give it, it says details shown in the appendix, and I'll put a number on it once we've got all the pages numbered. But maybe this is enough. We don't need that inset of that little Excel spreadsheet that is behind this. The bottom line is projected revenue increase minus fixed cost increase. And that's the number that we're left with.
Don't spend it all in one place.
Can we change it rather than must look for ongoing revenue sources to increased revenue sources and cost-saving measures? I'm not sure what ongoing revenue sources are.
Yeah, me either.
just town and schools must look at all revenue sources and cost-saving measures.
No, they don't need to look at it, they need to find.
Actually, how about additional revenue sources? That's not really possible, is it? And the town does a good job looking for grants.
They must continue to look for increased revenue sources and cost-saving measures.
What we're really saying is that town and schools must live within this possible spending increase, because we're not recommending an override.
Yeah, should we take the revenue sources out? Are we really saying they could look for more, should look for more grants? They can't get more money from the state.
If we say that all they can do is look for cost-saving measures,
No, I'm not,
it's a
I'm
pretty
not,
bleak picture.
I'm not saying that.
Okay?
But, I mean, we can take out the language.
No,
on the
I just don't know what,
this statement,
reasonably.
we can, whatever line we want to put here, honestly, it doesn't have to be this.
no, I just don't know what we actually think they could do to find additional revenue sources. I don't disagree with the idea, I just don't know how feasible it is.
Well, that's their problem, it's just our recommendation. You have to,
Not our budget.
right? We have a money problem, you got to find money. I don't know how you're going to find it. I feel like,
Can we take the bullet point
Yeah.
away? Thank you.
yeah, I didn't like that either.
There's only one way to find money, and we've already ruled it out.
You could make it not do that. All right, and then I have not done anything with our conclusion because that's another thing that pretty much is driven by the rest of the presentation. But, I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on what the presentation is going to say. So anything we want to do with this? Or does this say it all?
Thank you again for doing all this. Please do send it out again. Everyone's homework for the next 2 weeks is to take a look at your changes that you're about to send out. I would also say, from the open meeting law training that we did last week, We cannot direct any two people to get together in a huddle to read this. But if two people happen to get together to discuss it, that's fine. That is not a subcommittee, as long as they are not directed to do so. So if you happen to run into somebody at a coffee shop and discuss it, that's allowed, but you cannot be directed to do so.
I did have one comment on this. Should we be leaving the point in a recession is still possible at this point?
Yes.
Or should we,
I think you maybe said it at our last meeting, which is
Yeah,
why
it's
it's
like-
fair.
I know, it's,
Is
it is,
possible?
but every time they've said that for the last 3 years,
Yeah.
or 2 years, I'll say, it hasn't happened,
Well, does
right?
that mean if we take it out, it will?
It could.
The Fed's
I mean,
reaching the end of what they can do with interest rates. I mean, I know every year I have an argument for why it's possible, but I think the soft landing, it seemed like we were somehow magically heading for is not looking to be as soft.
Well, it's definitely not looking to be soft right now, now with the UAW
Isn't that
strike and
when a recession
layoffs
happens?
and everything else, but, you know, UPS is hiring 100,000 for the holidays, so.
Great.
So is Amazon hiring a lot too, but.
Is
anyway.
that more than usual or is that usual? In which case it doesn't
I
matter.
don't know, and
Yeah, that's all.
I guess still leave it in there. I just don't know if we could word it a little differently, but I would say, yeah, a recession is still possible, but we just don't know when. Yeah, just leave it in there.
It's pretty vague.
Yeah, it is pretty vague. It's, you know, that's that big question that that nobody has the crystal ball, so, wish I did.
Well, I was just thinking, if he had said it last time, I was going to say, can we drop a red flag, because we have it on tape. And we look at the replay.
Seriously. I am sure he watched us while he was on his vacation. All right, this thing is getting awfully close. So I will send it out one more time. And maybe we can get close to the last answer as soon as we have the certified reserve numbers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, next up is minutes. I sent out 4 sets of minutes for review. Assuming you all have read them thoroughly, I have 1 edit to propose. Does anyone else have any? Okay. In the meeting minutes for June 27th, there is a typo. Currently written as Ms. Russell reminded the others that the slides show we things currently stand. We should in fact be the word where, rather. So with that amendment, would someone like to make a motion that we approve the minutes for June 27th, 2023?
Motion to approve the June minutes, the June
27th
27, 2023 minutes.
as amended.
As amended.
Second?
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Abstentions? All right, thank you. That passes unanimously. 1 second.
Move to approve the minutes from July 25th, 2023.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Abstentions? All right, that passes. Thank you. Christine, do you have the whole list?
Move to approve the minutes from August 22nd, 2023, and September 12th, 2023.
Second.
All approves, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
I need to abstain from the 12th.
Abstentions? All right, we have 1 abstention. That is all of our minutes handled. Thank you.
Steve, did you abstain for September 12th? Okay, thank you.
Next up is liaison reports. Christine, Adam, anything? Anyone at that end? Steve?
Health Insurance Trust is meeting Thursday. We met last month. When we finally got the final numbers for last year, they were far worse than what we had anticipated. We came in with a $1.7 million loss, and 700,000 or more of that occurred in June, the final month of the year. The upshot of that is that basically removes most of our unrestricted fund balance. So we're entering the year pretty much without a safety net. Our new consultants last month went through a list of possible things we could do to change the cost structure. We'll meet Thursday, and they've been charged with quantifying all of those moves, but we will be coming forward with a list of recommendations to restore the trust to a healthier fiscal place in the near future. The particulars of last year, the first 6 months went pretty much as normal. We were still tracking because of, we had a very poor year at the reinsurance program. The premiums are around $1.3 million, and we only recovered $300,000, which is unusual. So we had a $1 million loss right there. Towards the end of the year, claims increased rapidly to the point where we believe they may well be large claims that have not hit our stop-loss threshold yet. So it may not be as dire as it appears, but we have very little knowledge of what's contained in the claims until a great deal of time passes and some analysis is done. We are still suffering from Harvard Pilgrim's data breach back in March. Some of what happened in June may have just been claims that never came in earlier months. There may be still some carryover. But we have a fair number of options. Unfortunately, most of them will take more time than a month or two to implement. So for those of you jumping ahead to what if we run a deficit this year, that would mean the free cash or E&D would get dinged proportionately. But we will do our best not to.
Jason, were you next?
I already gave the school capital improvement update. There was nothing that screamed out in my memory for the twin school, for the Boardwalk campus school building committee meeting, so it couldn't have been too bad.
Okay, the select board met not last night, but on September 18th. A few updates from the town. They're putting in their first DC fast charger at Liberty Field parking lot up with, I believe it's 2A, the baseball field up there was my understanding. Is that, I'm sorry, Veterans Field? It is being paid for by grants. They're also, 2A is owned by the state. Mass DOT is putting in a crosswalk with a light across Brook Street, across 2A at Brook Street. There's been a delay for supply chain issues to getting that light in, but there's a hope that that'll go up. I think John said in the winter, November, that's what I remember. As you might have heard, Concord has said that they would no longer like to be a part of the RECC, which has not been fully launched. They have not formally said that at a RECC meeting, but that is most likely coming, or it is coming. Currently, we are still pursuing a regional agreement with someone and talking to other towns about whether they would be interested, so that is something to look forward to. You might notice there is construction happening in the parking lot at Stop and Shop. We at the schools have been told not to use it for, some people who do it for junior high pickup. Yes. I'm calling it Stop and Shop because they're the ones who own it. And that is what it will become. So people are asked again, not to come through it, but stuff is starting to happen there.
Is that the Stop and Shop starting their part of it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering what the fence was for.
There are still some materials there staged as part of the Kelly's Corner project.
Okay, yeah, as I saw the fence and I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So I was curious.
For the Nagog Park, the meeting on the 18th was a continuance of the special permit meeting for their desired use of the site. They were still not fully able and requested a continued another continuance, which was pushed to October 16th. Meanwhile, there was some discussion around general ideas about the site. They're currently looking at one dealership happening there. They are going to be meeting with town staff to resolve some of the issues that have come up before coming back on the 16th, and probably have, from their perspective, those issues resolved in a mostly, hopefully, approvable site. One of the more exciting parts to me is that if you look at parking lots, they're often little islands of trees and greenery throughout. The proposal here is to do a large buffer of greenery, which is better for all the trees than trying to live in those cramped little spots. And it would put a visual and sound separation between them and Nagog Woods off to the side, so that it requires a special permission to do that, not do the little islands. But it sounded like there was general support for that. And come back on the 16th if you want to learn more. The next, I call it select board meeting because it's under the select board agendas, but it looks like it's largely a sewer commissioners meeting. It's coming up tomorrow, but it's during the day. Mr. Martin, is that something that the public is, it's an agenda item? And yeah, it's a public meeting of the sewer commissioners. Yeah, the sewer items are the only thing on the agenda, but it shows up as a select board agenda if you look at the select board agenda list. So if you're interested in that, they have separated out the idea of sewer commissioners and sewer business as separate from select board business. Something to keep in mind, and that is it for me. Anyone else?
Our next meeting?
10th, October 10th.
Okay, thank you. October 10th is the date for our next meeting. Please let me know if you cannot make it. Or if you can't be in person, we just need to know that, make sure we have enough here. It's a little bit of a nail biter sometimes, making sure we're going to have quorum. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Thank you all for continuing to come to the meetings.
Before we adjourn, can I just recommend to everybody the second annual Diwali Fest at the Sargent Memorial Library is on October 8th from noon to 4:30. It was a blast last year. It's put on by a great community organizer, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a big part of our community. So if you're around and free, stop in. There's great food, there's music, there's little sellers, and I highly recommend it.
They've got a whole bunch more vendors here.
October 8th. Yep, and there's shuttles with different parking sites. You will see posters up around town, and yeah, just highly recommend it.
That's at.
It's at the Boxborough Library, yeah, on the grass.
And you will not be able to park at the library, so just don't even try that. Yes, Jesse?
If we're doing reminders of what's coming up, the Ironworks Farm Open Air Tap Room is on October 7th, which is before we meet again, so I want to make sure to call that out.
Oh, good, I thought we'd missed that.
Nope, that's October 7th, 4 to 8 at the Faulkner Homestead.
It's at
Homestead.
It's not in the little white building?
No, I believe it's in the Homestead because all the banners are up at the Homestead.
Jones Faulkner Homestead, 5 High Street,
It's usually at Jones Tavern, is that? Is that
4
different?
o'clock, 4 to 8, Saturday the 7th.
The Homestead is on the corner of High
Yeah.
Street and Main Street, opposite side of the railroad tracks from Jones Tavern. Not opposite side.
Is
Kitty-
there
kitty
parking
corner
there, or
opposite.
does one park at the train station?
You would need to park at the free parking
That
lot
we
on
discussed?
School
On
Street
School Street.
and walk over the
Right.
bridge.
Thank you. So I will see you all on October 10th, and we will hopefully get to finalize the point of view. Please email me if you have any other meetings that, any other speakers you'd like to have in. I'm currently trying to get the Water District to give us an idea of what's happening on the larger scale with PFAS, just so we can keep that number in.
Thank you for getting the MBTA update. I was looking forward to that, so thank you for getting that done.
Also getting the school to come in to discuss the, what happened with the difficulties or the change in the budget, and trying to have us understand some of the demographic shifts that cause budgetary challenges unexpectedly at the start of the school year, just so we have an eye on what's happening there. Vlad, would you like to make a
I
motion?
move to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Abstentions? No. Thank you very much. See you all October 10th.
That was me.